All right, it looks like it's 3 o'clock and we might have a few additional people joining us, but let's go ahead and get started with the Citywide Advisory Committee agenda for Thursday, January 27th. Today we have a pretty full agenda and we'll go ahead and take you through that in just a moment. I did want to just briefly go through the city's vision, which is creating the city for everyone, with our mission being that we can create a city for everyone by embracing our community in the decision-making process, innovating and investing to protect our environment, and ensuring a thriving local economy that benefits all. And then really reminding ourselves of some of those project goals so that we can reflect and really provide comment that support each one of those. It's going to build on our strategic priorities as well as our Boise City Comprehensive Plans, which we call Blueprint Boise. We want to make sure that we're continuing to engage all of our citizens and stakeholders in the process. Really finding that best mix of traditional form-based and performance-based zoning tools that fit our personality as a city to ensure that we're protecting what's most important to us, incentivizing great design and a diverse mix of land uses, making sure we have a streamlined development review process, including procedures that increase predictability of land use decisions for both neighbors as well as developers. And then really making sure that we have a really good quality user-friendly document that has a nice structure that is intuitive, includes graphics and visuals and illustrations that really depict what we're looking for. So that should really get us started. Before we move on, I just wanted to kind of do a very, very brief recap. Last month, you asked, who all have we communicated with as far as agencies and other professional teams? So we went ahead and sent that contact list out to you. A number of you responded back with some additional individuals. So we went ahead and added those to our list. So we wanted to thank you for that participation. And then also with this month's agenda, last month we talked about, well, what have we done with Module 1? And to give everybody a refresher, we went ahead and sent out a list of who did we talk to for that Module 1 and the information that we heard. So you got 2 summaries that went with that as well. So that's a really good refresher of where we've been through the process and where we're going to move to today. So I think we can go ahead and bring up our presentation for today. And we'll go ahead and go to the next slide. And with this, we just wanted to make sure that we let you know what we've been up to. And so we'll do that briefly. We'll also start to get into reading Module 2, because this is going to be a really exciting day, because at 5 p.m. today, we're going to release Module 2 on the city's website. In addition to Module 2 content, there's going to be some materials that are going to help you navigate the module. We also have a executive summary that summarizes what those key changes are. So it gives you an idea of what you can expect as you read that document. We're also going to have a conversion map that's on there. We're going to give you a brief tutorial on how to use that as well. We'll go ahead and take a break, and then we want you to know what our community engagement is going to look like and when all of that's going to occur. So if we go ahead and move forward, we'll really talk about and get into reading Module 2. You don't have to take notes if you don't want to. We're going to have those documents online and available to you at 5 p.m. So you can reference those at any time. As I noted before, we've created an executive summary identifying what the key changes are in that module to help you. There's going to be all of this information displayed on our website, as well as some additional information. If you want to go back and take a look at what the diagnostics report said, or what Module 1 had to offer, or what that community engagement looked like, all of that's going to be on the website as well. we're going to go ahead and also provide you a sneak peek of what that community schedule and that neighborhood, those neighborhood and community conversations, those dates and times, so that everybody can plan accordingly and participate where they feel most appropriate. We've also been working on 2 surveys. So one is going to be a really detailed survey and will probably be better suited for those frequent users of the code. But we also have a survey that we want the general community to take a look at as well. So really looking at higher level changes. And like I said, that zoning map will also be available to us. So if we go ahead. So as we talk about just module 2, Clarion's going to provide you a brief synopsis of how to read that module and what those key changes are. And if we can go to the next one, then we're going to transition over and we're going to talk to Lindsay from our community engagement division. And she's really going to give you an idea of what that community engagement looks like, how you can provide us with community feedback in regard to module 2. And so just to kind of give you an idea, we are up there. So we're in January now. We're going ahead to release module 2 and that conversion map. But we're going to do a pretty extensive outreach effort for neighborhood and citywide involvement. And so that's going to take us all the way through February, March, and then we should have a synopsis for you in April of what we heard as part of that module 2 before we start to really dive into that module 3 as well. So if we can go ahead. And I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Don Elliott with Clarion and Associates and Gabby Hart, his colleague from Clarion and Associates, and they'll get us kicked off before we hand it over to Lindsay, and then Deanna will walk you through that conversion map.
So, hey, it's great to see the faces again after quite feels like a long time, but it's nice to be here on the date on which. Just a minute, got a call there. Just on the date on which we're going to release module 2 finally. As we've said many times, it covers a lot of territory, covers a lot of topics that a lot of people care about, and it will help. We are confident that it'll help inform and people's understanding of what module 1 means, what do the uses in district mean when you compare them with the quality and the parking and the landscaping and the other standards that go along with it. So for many months now, you've kind of had half of the puzzle in your hand, or a third of the puzzle. Things are about to get, we think, easier to understand the implications because of module 2 is out. So it's exciting. We're glad to be here again. Gabby is actually going to handle the first part of this presentation. I'm going to handle the second part. So Gabby, I will mute myself.
Andrea, do you still have the slides available to share? Thank you.
We do indeed. So go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So we know that getting through a large portion of a zoning code is not light reading for most. So we wanted to walk through how to read module 2 so that you can really digest it and give us good feedback rather than getting overwhelmed by it. Next slide, please. So starting with some helpful tips, first and foremost, keep the table of contents handy. So this not only gives you the full picture of the code, but it's helpful if you are in one section and are wondering if a different topic is going to be addressed. You'll be able to see if that's coming up. Read it section by section. And then next is that in the sections that interest you, typically towards the beginning, there will be sort of a summary table or an applicability table or specific subsections that set out the very basic rules and focus on those things first before moving into some of the more specific standards that are added on top of the general ones. If you're interested in a particular zoning district, focus on those subsections, if there are any that address that zoning district specifically. And if something seems strange, or if you are familiar with the zoning code and you think something's missing, or you're kind of wondering, is that a suggestion? Is that new? Is it a recommendation? The footnotes are great for context. Those are the breadcrumb trail of what we have done between the current code and this new code. And if you can't find what you need or what you think you want to read about, contact staff and they are happy to help you figure that out. Next slide, please. So this is the new structure of the code as a whole. We start with just general provisions, moving into our module 1 topics, which were zoning, districts, and uses. So determining which land uses can go where in the city. And then we move into the module 2 topic, which is development standards, which tell you how you can build and design those uses. And then after that, we have administration and procedures, which tells you the process by which development will occur and who is responsible for approving that development, followed by definitions and the specific plan districts, which are standalone sections of regulations that are not being rewritten. Next slide, please. So moving into specifically the chapter of development and design standards. Here's a quick look at the outline that I'll get into more detail in a minute. It's a longer chapter, but it contains the meat of how things are built and designed in Boise. Next slide, please. So the chapter begins with the table of applicability, and this tells you when each section or each of the development standard types will be reviewed for compliance. As you can see, there are some application or development types that are not required to comply with all the standards, and some that are required to comply with all of them. So if you come in with a change of use, you won't have to comply with the same standards as if you come in with a conditional use permit. Next slide, please. So I think this one has, yeah, there we go. Perfect. Thank you. So this is the more specific outline of development and design standards again, and we just wanted to point out that some of the sort of main things of this. First and foremost, lot and building forms. We place that early in the organization because it's the most common question of how big is it going to be? How tall is it going to be? How dense will it be? And then the rest starts with the macro land layout and moves into those microsite features. And then the operation and maintenance section is your obligations after the approval of the development. Next slide, please. So the common questions, so these letters and colored boxes on the side actually correspond to the How to Read Module 2 handout that Andrea mentioned and that she'll show later. But some of the common questions that the public has related to development and design standards are included here, and it includes their corresponding section references within the code, as well as the page number of the draft. So if you also have these common questions off the bat, this is a great place to start. If you go to the next slide. So two of the more common topics that people ask about are dimensional standards, including neighborhood protection standards, and then parking. So starting with lot and building form and dimensions. If you move forward one, it starts out with the dimensional standards summary tables. So these are the rules of how big can it be, how tall can it be, how dense can it be. And there's two different tables. One has the residential zoning districts. The other has the mixed use and special purpose districts. And then we move in to neighborhood protection standards, which require that taller buildings step down to protect neighborhoods. And then in addition to that, there are other building form controls for specific types of developments in this section. Next slide, please. And then for parking, this is a snapshot of the specific subsections of the parking section. And as you can see, it goes from the general parking standards into the sort of meat of it is minimum and maximum off-street parking standards. So how much parking does each use have to provide? Are there maximum parking requirements? Are we trying to avoid over parking certain sites? Those are found in this section. Parking adjustments is another big section. It's how the sort of basic minimum and maximum standards can be changed based on either location or based on planning goals you're trying to achieve. Those are in this section as well. And that was a pretty quick rundown of kind of the big things, but like Andrea said, there's going to be a handout that captures all of this information and more. But we just wanted to give you a brief overview of how to read Module 1 so that it helps you give us feedback. So if anyone has any questions or comments, we're happy to take those now.
I'm going to jump in for a minute. So if you want to mute, that's great. Thank you, Gabby. So just again, circling back a little bit, that was a great overview. And we could have included a similar guide to the main points of each section of the ordinance, but building height and size and lot size and parking have been two of the hot topics, two of the topic. The reason we focused on them is that's what that we hear about or staff hears about when they do outreach. So once again, if you have questions, where is the key section of the basic rules of this chapter, of this section of building design, of exterior lighting, of signs? Staff can help point you to them, or we can. If you want to ask now, we could answer that question. I do want to point out that one thing that will make it, I think, really helpful is the map, the conversion map. So for a while, months ago, council was asking us, and you were too, I think, when do we get to see the map? And the answer is today. Today it's going to be released at 5 o'clock. But if you're concerned about your block, you're concerned about your house, you're concerned about your neighborhood or the arterial or collector that is near your neighborhood, and wow, I certainly hope that one's not going to get too dense or too tall. You could even start at the map. Start at, okay, which new zone, where's my address? Zoom in. This is where I live, or this is where my business is located. Which zone district am I in? And use that as your entry point to go into the code. Okay, what am I concerned about? Height? Okay, then we go into the dimensions and form standards. And you look for the ones that apply in that zone district. Or parking, look at the ones that apply to that use in that zone district. But I think for many people, the new ordinance is about to become more real because the point of entry doesn't have to be the text of the rules in different uses or development standards. There's a new entry point, and that can be the conversion map, and that can point you in the direction that says basically what Gabby said. You don't have to read the whole thing from start to back as a novel. You're not supposed to. It's not a novel. But it is supposed to lead you to the answers to the questions. And often those questions are framed in terms of for this type of use, for this street, for this neighborhood, for this area. And that's a good lens to kind of focus on as you read the document or try to understand it and ask questions about the things you don't understand. So I'm going to be quiet. Are there questions about this part of it, about just how to get your arms around it when it lands in your lap later today?
We did have one question from Roberta, and she said that Module 1 was mentioned, and it really was intended for Module 2. This is how you're going to read Module 2. And she also asked, is the document hyperlinked? And at this point in time, it is not. So that table of contents is going to be a very valuable tool for you. It's going to help you navigate to the correct page and the section that you are interested in learning about. So make sure you keep that table of contents handy near you. That table of contents is in one of the handouts, so you can open the handout and then navigate that way as well. And I do have Byron with his hand up, so we'll go ahead and turn it over to Byron.
Thanks, Andrea. No questions, really just from Gabby's introduction there. It looks like the format and also the user guide there looks like it's really user friendly. So I applaud you all for creating a code format that even the infrequent users have a chance of being able to read. So I'm really hopeful. I've been telling everyone that I speak with about this process that module 2 is really where people need to be paying attention. And that's really where we want everyone to check in. So thank you for making that as user-friendly as possible. It looks great.
Well, thank you for the compliment, although we have to turn it around to staff. Staff has been doing a good bit of work trying to figure out what are the most helpful questions and the best answers. So thank you. It's been a team effort, but we'll accept the compliment, but we'll reflect it back on your own staff. So thanks.
All right, so do any committee members have anything else before we do move on and really talk about what those key changes are? Is everybody comfortable with that formatting and feeling comfortable that, yep, they can use these user tools as they move forward to navigate through this very lengthy product? Okay, well, I am not seeing anything, so we'll go ahead and move on. So take it away, Don.
Okay, I will start covering the key changes. And once again, we foreshadowed some of this when we spoke to you about this basic structure, and we kind of wrestled with some of these issues over the summer. And then put it into the draft module. Remember, this is a draft. It's out there to get public comments. We try to make it look good and internally consistent, but that doesn't mean it's final. It's not final at all until we go through all the public engagement process and hear all the comments that are going to come forward. So what I'm about to show you is about 10 slides. And we're trying to keep them on the main points, not only selecting the significant changes that you may hear from your neighbors, from your interest groups, from your business groups, or if you are asked, so what's changed? This is the kind of the primer to that. And I'm going to preface it by saying we're trying to point to these issues. And if you use a table of contents, you can find the section in which these things take place. I'm not going to try to summarize the details of every change. It's a complex city. If it were easy, we could have had this done months and months ago. So for every rule, there are nuances, and we're not going to try to cover all those nuances. We're going to try to cover the main points. So let's go to the next slide. One is this. We have had discussions with you and others over the summer over dimensional requirements, lot and building forms and dimensions. That's about the 5th time we've mentioned it today. It does include recommendations that some of the basic minimum lot sizes for primarily residential development be reduced. And there's a graphic there showing you in proportional terms what the recommendation is. There's a scaled drawing of a lot. 50 by 100 is a 5,000 square foot lot. 40 by 100 is a 4,000 square foot lot. That's one of the recommended changes. And in some of the zone districts, R1C, the recommendation is that we move to, we adjust the minimum lot size as is shown there. Now, that will affect primarily new development in the future because it is fairly rare for someone to come into existing developed lots with houses on them, buy them all, and you'd buy 5 or buy 4 and make 5 lots out of it. Could it happen? Yes. Does it happen very often? No. But it is changing the rules to try to get at the affordability issue that has been so prominent in a very standard way. Basically, the issue of what is a standard lot is under consideration in every city that we work in that's dealing with affordability. And one of the obvious things is reducing the land cost associated with each house. So this is one of the changes. In addition, to allow more creative layouts, the requirement in the current ordinance says, and it mustn't just be this wide. It needs to be this wide at the street or that wide at the street. There's a minimum frontage requirement. That constrains layout and in some cases makes it harder to develop unusual pieces or infill or leftover pieces of land because they don't lay themselves out that way. And so those are removed and both residential and in commercial because you don't need it basically. The basic lot size will handle this. And by removing that restriction, you just allow more creative building layouts. Next slide. That's one of them, dimensional standards. The other one that's related to dimension, we've shown you before, and that is we have strongly recommended that the the dwelling unit per acre measures be reduced, be removed in all the zones. For as an example here, you could have, if you had a 10 dwelling units per acre and you had an acreage requirement for each one, you might only get 5 units on a piece of land. If you took it out, you could have fit the parking and in that same building shape, put in 8 units. So just as lot sizes are key, when you get into multifamily, when you adopt a dwelling unit per acre minimum, it basically forces developers to build bigger and usually fewer, bigger, more expensive units on the same piece of land. And we're trying to say, one of the things we can do is to help you meet the market. If people can afford smaller apartments and you can park it in there, you can get your parking on your site, you can get your landscaping, you can get your open space. We're not going to put this artificial number on there that says, well, you could build a building this big, but it can only contain X units. We're allowing the market to try to respond by putting in as many units as they can on that lot, provided open space, parking, everything else meets the code. So that's another key change. Next one. We've talked about this many times, and I think all of you may have memorized it by now, but this is a little bit more detail. We have said, regardless of what the maximum height is in an activity center or a mixed-use district, if you are near a low-density residential zone, then one of two things has to happen. The top drawing says you need to keep any portion of that building within 100 feet of the property line of that house, no higher than 35 feet. So you don't have to push the whole building back. The drawing illustrates it. The building can come up to the setback, the side setback, but it can't be taller than a house, 35 feet being the proxy for a two-story house with a gabled roof. Now, on the bottom show, it says you've got an alternative. You could build it taller, but you have to add 10 feet of setback. So you got a choice. You can bring the building down and build it just as close to the house as you could otherwise, or you could leave it up and at the maximum height and give 10 more feet of setback. So you are pushing it back away from the house further. We'd love your comments on this. Often it is a topic that's debated. Is the right number 50 feet? Is it 10 feet more setback, or should it be 15 or 20? Is it 100 feet, or is it should be 50 feet? The point is the numbers are right when you say they're right. The concept is you cannot do a very tall building in an activity center or along a core arterial that is right next to the back of a house without bringing it down and being a good neighbor. That's the principle. Next one. There are bonuses in the, why don't we stop and take a hand? Patrick, you had a comment about that. We'll do that before we go on.
Yeah, a clarification. Is that only when two zoning types connect to each other? I'm thinking interior to, say, an R3 zone, where if there is a single family home on an R3 lot, would all of these rules apply on adjacent R3 lots within an R3 general zone? Or is this only a transition between different types of zones?
I am trying to look that up so I don't give you a bad answer. Give me a second to do this right. I'm going to make sure. It is, I'm going to read it to you, Patrick. It applies to all lots in R2 or R3 zone districts that contain a principal use other than a single family detached duplex, triplex, or fourplex dwelling that abut. So the answer is it doesn't apply just when the lot changes. It applies even in the same zone district, those zone districts, if your neighbor has a right to build a taller building than a house.
I see. Interesting. So it's actually kind of a soft downzoning of R3.
Well, it's a downzoning of 10 feet or of
right. But many of the lots are, they're normal 50-foot wide. So if you're adding 10-foot setbacks on both sides of a 50-foot or 60-foot wide lot, that's a pretty.
Well, yeah, that's right, and that would be found on page 180 if you want to make a comment on that. I read you half of it because that is the half that I thought you were asking about. The other half says any mixed use or special purpose zone districts that have a side or rear lot line. So when the zone district changes, it applies, and it also is drafted currently to apply in R2 and R3 when you do something taller than a house. And that may be something you want to suggest be changed.
Thank you. Okay, appreciate the clarification. I'll look into that.
Sheldon? I think Sheldon had her hand up. Oh, she took it down. Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I think as soon as I turned my microphone on, it came off. I think I'm going in the same place perhaps that Patrick is. And I guess I just want to be clear. You said page 180 is where you were reading from, so that we can look at it when we get it.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. It is in 180. And the question was, we also got a question in the chat related to this. Does it apply when you have commercial next to residential? And the answer is the second part of that triggering mechanism is it also applies to all lots located in any mixed use or special purpose districts that have side or rear lot lines abutting the R1L, R1B, or R1C districts. So wherever you have a break between the low density residential districts and any mixed use or special purpose district, they also apply there. So I think that answers the question that was in the chat.
So let me just follow up. So in the image that we're looking at, if that single family, assuming the new development is on the right, the multifamily or mixed use. So say it's an R3 and the single family building is also an R3, you would have to meet the additional 10 feet?
Yes.
Okay.
Daniel, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I just, as experts, what was your logic in wanting to exactly, like in this figure, looking at the top diagram, that the building would have to match the residential building height? Because I think you're acknowledging that there's a transition here, right? You're going from residential to larger buildings. And so it strikes me just, aesthetically that you would expect it to be, you wouldn't want it to be like 10 stories tall, but having it, somewhat taller. So I'm just wondering, how did you guys come up with, we think the standard should be the same height rather than, some plausible 1 or 2 stories taller?
This is a standard approach that we've used in a lot of communities. And the reason is the least threatening thing about the neighboring larger scale development to a person owning a single family house is to say the portion of it closer to your house will be no taller than your house. So we have in some places said it can be 10 feet taller. But that's rare. And I'm just giving you the honest answer. The answer is you're worried about it being tall. We're trying to come up with objective standards that will help, in many cases, accommodate density along collectors and arterials that automatically do back up to residential neighborhoods. How do you do that without scaring the adjacent homeowner or leading to people saying, well, if that's going to be taller than my house, then I object to the densification of the areas along the commercial corridors. And so it's a choice. If you think it ought to be higher, recommend it. It would not be the first, but 35 feet is the standard approach.
Thanks.
Let's go to the next. Let's go. All right. We're getting some chat in the neighbors. Andrea, would you like me to continue through these key changes and take the questions in the chat at the end?
Yes, so we'll go ahead and present everything. And then as always, we'll go ahead and allocate that last 10 to 15 minutes to check in with any attendees that would like to provide comment.
Okay. So as I've said, all of the numbers here are subject to whatever you think, whatever the city as a whole believes is the right thing to do. I think the principle is important. And I hate to repeat myself, but I will. You don't want to have, if possible, a discretionary discussion or negotiation each time residential that you want to keep low residential abuts areas that Blueprint Boise and other areas say need to accommodate more density. They're on the edges and they're on streets that could accommodate more things, or they're a designated activity center. There ought to be a standard approach to that. And the one that numbers are variable. The question is, if you don't do that, you result in pushback saying, well, then I don't want that densification. And that densification in the places where Blueprint Boise calls for it is a pretty fundamental part of Blueprint Boise. Let's take one more. Drew?
Yeah, thanks, Don. The question's on that one. And what if, for example, it was along a corridor where on one side of the corridor you had R3, on the other side we had a new mixed use zone? Would that 100 feet, is it are we talking about just directly abutting on property lines?
That's right. It's directly
Okay.
abutting on property. It does not apply across streets. Street would probably get you 100 feet of right away anyway, but no, it applies to abutting side and rear lot lines.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Let's keep going then. Next slide. As we mentioned earlier, there are incentives built into this, built into module 2. We have tried to narrow them down, and the new one is an attempt to encourage more sustainable and resilient development. After talking this through with staff and getting comments over the course of the summer, what it does is give incentives in exchange for basically there's a menu of 7 things that would help reduce energy consumption or water consumption. And we decided to focus on those 2 things. As everybody knows, sustainability could cover a variety of topics. The more topics you try to cover, the harder it is to measure, are they achieving the savings? Because, they're only achieving this much of electricity and this much of water and this much of something else. So in general, our strong advice is that you focus on the things that are measurable and that are important. And in general, the 2 that have risen to the top of the pile so far in a draft that is ready for your review are energy savings and water savings. And that is another thing. You can take a look at that. That will start if you want to take notes. It starts on page of, I think, about 190. Because it's fair game to debate and say, I think we ought to be incenting it differently or different things, but that's in here, the big change, a significant change. By the way, the intent, and I think we've mentioned this before, is that these incentives would be more or less automatic. The way you get people to modify their building behavior is to tell them, if you do X, you get Y. It's not that we have to horse trade about how much X in return for how much Y. So we'd love comments. Isn't that simplistic? No, it really isn't. It adds a lot of predictability. If you think it's too generous, comment. If you think it's not generous enough, comment. But it is much easier to change behavior when somebody says, if I do this, I know I will get that. Next one. Active alternative transportation. We have talked about parking, and Gabby pointed out where the parking regulations and adjustments are made. This came up in module 1-2 a little bit, but we have recommended reducing the off-street parking requirements for single-family, duplex, triplex, and fourplexes from 2 to 1 per unit. That will provoke some real discussion in the neighborhoods. It's all, it is our recommendation, and it has been vetted up and down with staff that we really ought to do this. It's helpful to keep this in context, in the sense that there are cities out there that are just repealing minimum parking altogether. This recommendation is to cut it for housing. These are not subject to a maximum. It does not say that you can't put 2 or more parking for single family, and up to a fourplex says you don't have to. And that's going to be something we want to call to your attention, because it will be of interest to many people. For commercial and multifamily developments, we have included, and I was trying to count them up, it's maybe between 1/4 and 1/3 of the commercial uses that have a potential to overpark, to try to park for what we used to say before COVID and before the internet, the Sunday after Thanksgiving. The biggest parking day that could ever possibly happen here, which pushes things apart, drives up land costs and impervious surface. So we have tried to judiciously insert maximum parking to those uses which we think actually have a potential to do it. There are many, many uses out there that do not. The odds on them overparking are nil or almost nil, or they're small facilities where the difference between 6 cars and 8 cars is not going to make a difference in walkability or a substantial difference in anything else. And so it tends to focus on larger, more complex facilities, but we'd love your comments on that. The issue of maximum parking is always an issue with the business community. What if I need more? And so that is something I'd be particularly interested in hearing the business community's response to. Next slide. Quality building design citywide. Currently they're the D districts, but we have pulled them into the body of the code. It is no longer an overlay district of D or DD. They are based on these 2 documents that you see images of. But basically, we've pulled in parts of those and made them apply generally throughout the city without whether or not they're in the D map or the DD map. We Clarion found it confusing as to where those apply, where they don't apply. Blueprint Boise talks in terms of improved design quality throughout the city, especially for multifamily and commercial products. And so basically we've broadened the applicability. The content is very much based on documents that you already have in place. It is primarily a change in their applicability and to broaden it. Next slide. Access and connectivity is a new chapter. I think we've highlighted it before. It was in the table of contents Gabby showed you. Because of the importance of this, bicycle, pedestrian, and vehicle access and connectivity to air quality, to walkability, to public health, to social interaction. There's a new chapter now. It's not kind of parts of many different chapters like the subdivision standards. We've pulled them into one place to try to coordinate them. There's a new section that creates standards for driveways, construction of streets, pathways, bicycles, cars, and delivery vehicles. So here's the issue, but I'm calling your attention to it because it's a new chapter, because it highlights something that was highlighted in Blueprint Boise. And frankly, in almost every code that we're drafting these days for larger cities, they do this. They are calling out and saying, look, this is a big deal. You need to think about this as you lay out your development or redevelopment. It may require you to put in more connectivity than was there before. And if you're platting raw land, you may have to put in more connectivity than you thought you would have to. But it's an issue because, as any builder will tell you, streets are not only expensive to build, but they take out land that could otherwise be used for housing or for tax-paying properties. So finding that balance as to how much you want to push this in the name of, again, walkability, public health, and at what cost is something that we'd like to hear comments on. It's important. The question is, how important in light of the price you pay for it? Next one. And finally, this new chapter on operations and maintenance. Zoning ordinances are often written as if, well, you got to meet all our criteria, and once we all nod and smile and raise our hands and you got your approval, go. And the truth is that for a variety of reasons, it is also important how you maintain your property. So it is a new section dealing with the duty to maintain landscaping, lighting, sign, other things in good condition, clean good condition, and frankly, clarifying that the failure to maintain these things is a violation of the ordinance. If your site plan was approved by trees and the trees all die, you need to replace the trees. That was the condition on the approval. It's not, well, I can't help it, they died. The answer is, well, you either need to take better care of them or you need to plant another one. And so that is a new aspect of zoning that we have going. Getting feedback here, but I think we're almost done. Next slide. That's it. We are done. I don't know if that was too much detail or too little detail. It is hard for you to know because you don't have it in your hands, but within a couple hours you will. And you might want to refer back to this in terms of things that we thought we really wanted to call your attention to and hear your comments on, or maybe you have questions right now about things we didn't cover or that you just disagree with or agree with. Yes, Daniel.
Yeah, so I was curious about the application of the citywide design standards. So is the hope there that will increase predictability? I mean, I know that it's one of the goals that we have that Andrew read at the beginning of the meeting. So was it just to be consistent, or do you see that as a mechanism for providing guidance? But again, if you follow these rules, then it's going to get approved, and you've kind of taken some of the guesswork out of the design review process.
Gabby, do you want to take that one or not? Okay. The answer, Daniel, is yes. It is not just for consistency. We have brought in from those documents some of the fundamental things that are usually not left to negotiation through a design review process. You have a design review process. You will, when you see module 3, no one's asked us to get rid of it. But there are things that we've clarified in each one of these things. The design standards still do apply, but there are certain parts of the basic building design, location on the lot, building entrances facing the street, the amount of transparency facing the street, and articulation that we have brought into the code and said, we are suggesting that the realm of negotiation through the design review process be narrowed, and that some things be predictable and kind of taken off the table because they're important to achieving the walkability and street orientedness of Blueprint Boise. And I'll repeat them again, but you'll have it in your hands in an hour. The four are, it basically says building entrances, you need to have tailored by zone districts, but building entrances facing the street, you need to have a certain amount of glazing and transparency facing the street, and you need to have a certain amount of articulation to break up the building facade. Now, you deal with all of those things right now in your design standards, but as we understand it, they are part of a negotiated process. In most newer codes, those aspects are codified, and the negotiations through a design review process are over the remaining aspects of it. If you disagree, then you probably want them those codified portions to be taken out, but that's what we've codified. And we do think it'll increase predictability. That was the goal.
And also to add on to that, if I might, we really look to add to the design review standards and guidelines, and there are some roadways that have specific designations that have these requirements, and they have a lengthy list of requirements. But there was nowhere in our code that required buildings to be moved to the street. There was nothing that required building entrances to access the roadway. And if we want to support transit, if we want to support walkability and pedestrian friendliness, those are all key items that are important. And even looking at not only is it a predictability factor, but an encouraging people to use our sidewalk system and our transit system, it's also an equity issue, because we think that all neighborhoods and all streets should have some basic design forms that are critical to creating a quality urban form. So that's where a lot of that came from.
Jessica has her hand up.
Hello. On the last item that you mentioned, the maintenance requirement, will that apply to the building proper in terms of landscaping? We have some buildings that were recently approved where the landscaping is part of the building, attached to the building on multiple levels, on parking garages. So will it apply to that? There's a parking structure on Myrtle, and then the ICCU building would be the ones I'd be thinking about. Also, would it be retroactive so it applies to those buildings? What are the comments on that?
So as I read it, and by the way, when you it's the section on operations and maintenance is pretty short. It starts on page 307. The answer is no to your first question, and you can comment one way or the other, but it only applies to landscaping required by the code. So if you, out of the goodness of your heart, planted a bunch of trees on your property and the city had not required you to do that, that is something you did out of the goodness of your heart. There's not a duty to maintain it. This has to do with landscaping required by the code. My guess is that when you do landscaping built into terraces or other areas of an existing building, I doubt if that was required by the code, so it would not be covered. And in terms of retroactivity, the answer is usually this would apply proactively, just because if you, and we can clarify that, usually if you change the rules, you apply them proactively. Sometimes operations and maintenance is an exception to that, because we're not requiring that you tear down anything. We're not requiring that you build anything. All we're saying is, if at the time your property was approved back in 2010, it required the landscaping, then you need to maintain it. So I don't have a clear answer for that. Usually it would be proactive, but it would not be unusual for the city to want to make that retroactive for things that were required by the code.
And Jessica, just to add on to that too, in this specific example that you gave, the landscaping that would be in those overhang landscaping items, that's something for us as staff, as well as our elected and appointed officials, to really note that, if that is something that adds to the architectural design of the building or is of something important, then we would go ahead and put a condition of approval that said that those items need to be maintained in good health. So I believe in that particular design review application, we did require them to be maintained in good health over time. So we should be covered on that particular item.
I'm sorry, Hillary has her hand up.
Yeah, I'm just wondering what the remedies are if somebody doesn't maintain.
Well, we don't, remedies are usually put in module 3. So the short answer is most codes, when we write module 3, there's usually a section on what is a violation of the ordinance, and what are the city's steps in telling you you're in violation and allowing you a chance to bring it back into compliance, and what are the penalties. And usually they're not separately written for zoning. There are standard municipal penalties that apply. If you go through you got a letter, you didn't respond, they gave you another letter, you didn't respond, they gave you 30 days, you didn't respond, and now the fines tick in. So I don't know the answer to your question, except most cities decide that there are standard penalties for violating the city code. And those are what apply to you if you do not bring your property into compliance.
And Hillary, some of that is established by state code as well. So state code would identify this as ultimately an infraction. So it would carry a maximum penalty of $1,000. There are some other avenues to where if somebody does not repair a tree that has been removed, the city can go in, plant the tree, and then ask for reimbursement. So there are some alternatives that are appropriate and we can utilize as well.
Thanks, Andrea. That was actually what I was getting at, because if the point is to have the landscaping,
right?
You know, you want to find a way that actually gets done, because some of those low monetary fines don't have the desired effect of actually getting the landscaping done.
We agree completely. And although we haven't drafted this, and frankly, I can't even remember what your current violation of penalties things are, but all enforcement chapters of zoning ordinances these days are written with the goal of bringing properties into compliance. The point is not to get the money. It's the city may end up spending more money than it gains on those penalties. That's not the point, and it's a trivial contribution to the city's budget. The point is to bring things back into compliance.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions about the top 10, or however I didn't count them, top X things? Because otherwise, I don't know if you want to take a short break, Andrea, or move on.
We will have a short break. If anybody does not have anything additional that they would like to present out there, in the chat, we did have some discussions that people were really, really supportive of parking reductions, as well as the connectivity standards as well. So those were all very well received by a number of our individuals. So, and then it looks like Daniel has his hand up again.
Yeah, Don, I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about you kick things off with the minimum lot size going down to 4,000 feet. And again, just sort of what was the thinking around that number? You said, 100 by 40. I was just, looking at some of the lots out at Harris Ranch, which is a recent development, and some of those lots are 3,200 square feet. So there's a kind of a market example of, developers wanting and making, there's a market demand for smaller lots than 4,000 square feet. So, and I think also certainly thinking about within the city limits, if there are larger lots, then there's potential to create more infill development if you had a smaller minimum lot size. So it just maybe reflect a little bit on how you came up with 4,000 versus 3,200 versus 2,500. Like, what was in the consideration set and why did you choose 4,000?
So you're exactly right. And there are, as a matter of fact, there are cities out there, and we have been involved in places. Sorry, I'm flipping through because I want to get to the dimensional tables so I can give you a more detailed answer. Just a second. And then I will indeed answer your question. I want to make sure, but I want to, just give me a second. Here we go. Page 167 is the first of these things. So I wanted to point out, first of all, that was the number for R1C. And we were trying R1C, there's a lot of land in R1C. And it was a deliberate choice to say everybody should contribute to the achievement of the Blueprint Boise goals, which include housing affordability and housing diversity of type. And here, in an area where many, many people care a lot about the quality of their neighborhood, we are going to take a 20% reduction. You're exactly right. We have seen 3,200 square feet. There are many parts of America platted at 2,500 square feet lots, 25 by 100. So but that's R1C. I did want to point out in R2, it is 2,500 square feet. And in R3 for a single family detached, it is 2,000 square feet. So it's basically a sliding scale. R1, each one of them has a reduction that allows a smaller lot than you could do before. And there are zone districts that allow a minimum lot size of 2,000 or 2,500 square feet. I will say this, and then I'll probably regret saying it. If we went from 5,000 to 2,500, I'd probably be run out of town on a rail. And therefore, it was an attempt to do something reasonable that would be perceived as reasonable and not terribly threatening to people who are used to 5,000 square foot lots in their neighborhoods and future neighborhoods, sort of like the ones they live in.
And again, I appreciate we don't want you to be run out. None of us want to be run out of town on a rail, but we also want see opportunities to kind of stay within scale, but also do infill development in a meaningful way. And so I guess, and again, just as point of information, have you seen? I mean, I guess one of my concerns, and maybe it's misplaced, but is that at that relatively that policy would really bind, would have an impact in new developments where you're having new plats, but it would not have much impact on infill development where, so it's not, whereas if you had a smaller amount, then someone could potentially subdivide and build, and have a separate lot.
Right.
And so have you seen, so what is how has that decision played out in other communities where people say, well, no, actually we like the idea that some people might be able to subdivide and we'd get, new houses on some of our existing lots. So what's the amount of the reduction that you would need where you would actually see that as that would actually come to pass over time?
It's a good question, Daniel. I think it's a site-specific question. We'd have to take a look at your infill parcels and see. And we have your staff has good data. They've given it to us, but I don't know which ones are infill and undeveloped. I don't have a straightforward answer to your question. We have had negative pushback when the more you have neighbors saying, you mean that if this vacant lot next to me and the one next to them could be subdivided into 4 lots. There are 2 lots now, and I'm expecting 2 houses. But with this new rule, they could put 4 lots where they could 2 now. You get major pushback. So that is part of this is a political question. You mean you're doubling the density in my neighborhood? And the answer is no. This could lead to a 20% increase because it's a 20% reduction in lot size. So there is no science to this, Daniel, but I'd love to have your comments. And if people want to reduce it, it would help affordability. It is mostly a matter of trying to portray this as a reasoned, balanced approach that in which all the residential neighborhoods will contribute to affordability, but no one is being asked to radically change the nature of the neighborhood they bought into.
Thanks.
Does anybody else want to talk about the structure, any of those key changes? Are you surprised? Are you supportive? And you also don't have to make all of your determinations today. As always, we'll go ahead and follow up with our minutes, and you'll be provided a link as well, so you can provide additional feedback there. And you always have the ability to provide those comments in writing to us as well. And then once we get back from the break, Lindsay's going to walk us through some of those community engagement events and the surveys and how everybody can participate in those processes as well, and how they can provide useful feedback that's really going to drive the direction of the code rewrite. So all of those things are going to be really, really helpful. And yes, one of our individuals has noted that Ed McCluskey does have his hand raised. We will get to all of our attendees at the end of the meeting, as we've done with all of our others. So everybody will have an opportunity to provide comment. But unfortunately, we do not have the ability to address attendees' comments as we go through. But we are looking good for time, so I believe everybody should have ample time to provide comment once we get to that section. So let's go ahead and take a break. It's 4 o'clock straight up, so we can join us back at 4:05, and we're going to hear about community engagement next. All right, it is 4:05. So I would like to introduce you to Lindsay Moser. She's with our Community Engagement Division, and she's going to give you a brief tutorial of what you're going to be able to find on the website, how you can participate, how we got to the level of involvement that we did. And she'll really walk you through that based upon what we heard from you, what we've heard from our community, as well as the specific request from our neighbors asking us to come to them. So I will go ahead and turn it over to Lindsay.
Thanks, Andrea. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep,
Cool.
sound great.
Cool. Great, yes. Thank you. Okay, so before I jump in, just kind of want to give a quick recap of how we've gotten to this point and then how we plan on moving forward. So we had Module 1 outreach in the spring. A lot of the feedback that we heard from you all, as well as the community, is that a lot of this is very confusing and we need to do a better job of breaking down the modules and bringing it more into a community-focused language. You asked for a more robust engagement plan for Module 2, and we'll kind of go through some of those items here in a moment. Okay, let's move to the next slide. So today at 5 o'clock, as we've mentioned several times, on our website, and Andrew will also send you these materials, we'll go live with all the information that we have discussed here today. So a couple of the first things that we provided was how to read Module 2. So this is kind of an infographic that we discussed and a lot of the information that Gabby brought up earlier, you know, of how to read it, certain sections that might apply to you or you might be most interested in. And we also provide a dimension reference guide. So when we reference 5 feet, for the general person, you might have a hard time thinking what that is. So that will all be available on our website and also downloadable as a PDF. The second is the executive summary. This covers pretty much a lot of the items that Dawn discussed earlier, but we really tried to break it down into more community-focused language and help the community understand why these proposed changes are what they are. A lot of times we also reference Blueprint Boise and how it shapes a lot of these proposed changes. Again, the executive summary is about 6 pages that we put together. It's not exhaustive of everything, but everything that we thought was probably most important to the community. And then lastly, as you'll see in the middle, is the conversion map. We created a story map in the GIS system that's pretty interactive. So you can see the existing code as well as the proposed zone changes, and you can zoom in to maybe specific neighborhoods that you might be looking in, or even your own home. And that will also be available in a PDF as well. And there's a nice legend that we created too that shows the existing zones and then the proposed zones as well. Those are all color coordinated, as you can briefly see, but Deanna will get into that later. Next slide, please. So on the screen right now, these are all of the community outreach events that we have planned for the next couple of months. I just want to reiterate that these are all outward facing, very community focused, as I had presented back in December. So we have 7 of the neighborhood planning area meetings. As you can see, the first one will be on February 8th with the central bench. And then this also includes all the work sessions that we'll be going throughout the city and our commissions as well. I do want to reiterate that these are only public. We have several meetings scheduled with a lot of more of the technical groups privately. And if you have a group that you are interested in having more of a one-on-one conversation with our group and having an outreach event, please reach out to us. We're happy to do so. Within these events, we do have 4 additional, within the 7 neighborhood, on top of the 7 neighborhood events, we also have 4 community events. Some of those are virtual, some of those are in person as well. 2 of those are a combined event. Those are focused on housing and the zoning code rewrite. As we continue to have both these conversations, we really thought that they interject and the conversation should be had together. So those events are just a little bit longer, but we think it's important as the city continues to move throughout our strategic initiatives that we have those conversations together. Next slide, please. Thank you. So as I've kind of brought up a few times, our outreach strategy is to go neighborhood specific to those planning areas. Within each of those areas, we will have a couple different examples from a local architect. One will be commercial and one will be residential. we'll be highlighting specific changes with each of those examples of what might be changing in your neighborhood. So a huge thing that we want to reiterate is that we are really trying to encourage people to attend their local neighborhood meeting. And really that's because you understand where you live and you can provide comment to those specific areas. Of course, we also have the community-wide ones that we are happy to welcome everybody to join those ones as well. As you saw previously, there's a large list of events that those will be open for registration at 5 o'clock as well. Next slide, perfect. We will have 2 surveys. These will not be available today. We're going to give the community an opportunity to kind of digest module 2 first before we put these out to the community. So those will be coming out in the coming weeks. The first one will be a technical survey, which is very detailed. It's quite lengthy, but we think for some of the more frequent users, this is a really good opportunity to provide us some really concrete feedback. The second one, we are considering our community survey that will also be available in Spanish, that we really tried to break down some of those key changes, make it in a more community focused language, but still providing really quality feedback for us to take back at the end of this event. We're also planning a survey street team, for lack of a better term. We'll take a lot of our staff team and head out into the community, kind of pop-ups, trying to get people to encourage to take the survey, any education that we can provide on the zoning code rewrite, as well as putting posters around town with the link to the survey. This is kind of testing the best results for us on how to get a better response rate throughout the community on some of these surveys. Next slide, please. That kind of wraps up for just general outreach that we have planned. Again, not completely exhaustive. Those are just the public facing events that we're focusing on. If you have any questions or comments, we're happy to take those as well. And that's kind of where our community outreach is planned.
So we have questions from Roberta and then followed by Byron.
Hi, and thank you. Sparing you my background, I was wondering, in the past, I have read what a successful response rate would be, like how to set our expectations, because I wasn't able to attend the last meeting, but I did listen to the video, thank you. And there's always concern about how many people participate, but I also know that not everybody participates. So is there a response rate level that would help us monitor our own expectations for what we hear from our community?
And just to clarify, Roberta, are you speaking specifically about the outreach events or more the survey? Or both?
I think both. I mean, and obviously outreach in the time of the COVID is probably skewed. So I know we have to take that into consideration, because so for example, I know people expect 100% participation, but I know that's totally unrealistic. So I know from past things I've read, and I don't know what the current expectation would be. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a lot of this, we really focus on the quality of the conversations too, not necessarily the quantity. Of course, we love to get a lot of survey results back. And I think, you know, the last survey, we sent you all kind of what that recap looked like. I think we had over 1,000 people take it, 1,000 comments. That's a good benchmark for us. Like, okay, that's what we heard from the first module. That's a good starting point moving forward, at least in terms of the survey. And then in terms of the conversations with the neighborhoods, I think, again, the quality, we're doing our best job that we can. You know, we're reaching out to our neighborhood associations, heading out to multifamily units to make sure people are aware of the conversations that are happening, and doing the best that we can to reach as broad-based audience that we can. So I wish I had a more specific answer, but that's just kind of the general benchmarks that we're following. Again, focusing on the quality of the feedback.
So Lindsay, I'm just going to add one more thing, because I know there's others with questions.
Sure.
I know in my neighborhood association, there isn't much information that comes to my neighbors directly. It just happens to be that I'm interested, so I attend some of the neighborhood association meetings. So through Energize, or whoever the city might be able to focus it, I know that neighborhood associations also get funding to send information out to neighbors. So I think that would be by mail. I think that would be really beneficial to a lot of people who don't even know neighborhood associations exist, which is basically most of my neighbors. because I tell them, hey, you know, we have a neighborhood association, maybe you might want to pay attention. So that's my pitch. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Roberta. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Lindsay. I attended the ADU pilot program presentation that you all put on. It was really great. Both of those were great. I'm just wondering what the format of these community outreach efforts will take, if it's sort of a presentation followed by questions, comments, or if it's a workshop format. What can I tell people to expect?
Yeah, great question, Byron. I'll just kind of give you a general guideline or outline of what we think these conversations are going to look like so far. Again, our first one is in a couple of weeks, and then we'll go from there. So the general thought is to kind of have a general conversation about Blueprint Boise and how it's still relevant today. Then move into some of these key changes that we talked about, just in general, again, kind of a nice conversation, and then dive into some of the examples that we have on the neighborhood level that are residential and commercial. Now, some of these groups do provide bigger groups to be events, essentially. So if we decide we want to do breakout groups, we might do so depending on what the attendance looks like for signups, as well as using, I think you might have been there for one of the housing ones that we did using the tool called Slido as well. So we're trying to get a little bit more creative on some of these outreach events of just, let's make sure we're, learning and growing and trying to come up with creative ways to make this an interactive event. So hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thanks, Byron. And I see Brad with his hand raised.
Hi, thanks. Maybe I was asleep, but maybe could you explain to me how these outreach events are being presented to the public? Besides being on the Boise City website, I've looked at this list that was sent out this week of all the events that had taken place this last 2 years. And aside from the citywide advisory committee meetings, I don't remember hearing about a single one of these. I know that you guys should be providing tools for us so that we could have decent input here. I would appreciate it if at least we heard from the city, our committee heard from the city on these events happening. And I'm seeing that it was on the radio, some basement radio channel. It sounded like I listened to it today. I've never even heard of the radio station before, like elevator music or something. I don't even know what it was, but can we get more information out? I think Roberta had mentioned maybe the mail or something, maybe, I don't know. I realize that kind of stuff costs money, but to get a real participation, we need to make some more effort in getting this out to the public. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. And just a quick comment on that. Again, Andrew will send this all out with the link to our website that will have all the events as well. We can also include that in a PDF if you guys want. And the more the merrier that we can share, even better, using a lot of traditional methods that we use, website, social, and then also, kind of our street team of putting boots on the ground to go out to the neighborhoods, whether that's door knocking, using, we'll have a couple flyers going around as well. But thank you for the comments, Brad. I appreciate it. And to a few comments I just saw in the chat, we did send a press release yesterday, so some local media is starting to pick it up, which is what we really hope for. People are hearing it on multiple avenues. Shellen, I see you have a question.
Yeah, thank you. I have two questions. Would you mind going back to the slide that probably 3 slides back or whatever that showed the list?
Lena, you want to go back?
Sure. And so my 2 questions are both pretty broad, and it's most like something to think about. I feel like there's kind of a general distrust of government right now, local government and larger. And so I just wonder if there's been a consideration of bringing in, quote, the experts and, i.e. Don and Gabby and their team to any of these meetings, maybe specifically those that are intended to be like larger or something, just because I think it's important for people to understand how difficult this stuff is. It's not easy stuff to get. So that's my one comment. And then my second comment is maybe a little bit more for the professional team, Don and his team, but the amount of outreach that I saw based on what Andrea sent me, like, it seems like a lot, right? Because this list is sort of just the public outward facing, but the stuff that you've done to date with the surveys, but also going to trade groups, going to neighborhood associations. I just wonder what communities, like maybe peer communities to Boise, what you guys see them do in regards to the amount of time, the amount of outreach, the amount of survey results, to Roberta's point, but like, what are the expectations to quote a industry reasonable amount of outreach? Because we could do outreach forever. And I just want to know, like, I know that's not our plan, but I just kind of want to know from the professionals, what do you guys see and what seems to be a reasonable amount?
I will answer just briefly, and then I'll probably kick it over to Andrea because we have talked some about some peer cities as well. So now I'm drawing a blank on your first question. Oh, trust in government and having maybe some of Clarion or experts at some of these meetings. We have talked about that, and we'll continue to discuss that further. Having a couple more local people that we know provide kind of a good bipartisan, for lack of a better term, person that, you know, if a community member says, okay, well, I don't agree with this, can we have someone that's in the bipartisan role say, okay, well, how about this? We have talked about that, and we'll definitely continue to consider that in some of these. And again, it's hard in our exhaustive list, you know, maybe it's one or two of the general community ones that we can provide someone of that nature in those meetings, especially Zoom, you know, a lot easier to have someone from Clarion present at some of those. So we will take that into consideration, especially some of those larger meetings. So, and then the second question, we did have looked pretty extensively at peer cities that have done zoning code rewrites recently. And I will probably kick that over to Andrea to kind of talk about that. I would say I'm really proud of what we have done. Not saying, you know, we can't continue to grow, but I'll kick that over to Andrea because she's really dug into some of those cities.
Well, I kind of wanted to hear from Dawn and
Or
Gabby.
Yes. Yeah.
No offense,
Yeah, for
Andrea.
sure.
I'm more like you guys do this every day.
I'm happy to answer, but Andrea, did you want to, I don't know what research Andrea has done. I can tell you my perspective, and I will tell you my perspective, but Andrea, do you want to say anything first? And then I'll answer.
Oh, go ahead, Dawn.
Oh, well, what's the expectation? The expectation always is more. Whatever you did, you should have done more. I'm sorry, but that's just the way it is. And I would say that the amount of outreach that has been conducted so far in this process in Boise is clearly above average for medium-sized cities that I've seen. I don't want you to quote me, but it is in the top quarter. I'm not sure it is more than any other city I've ever seen, but it's top drawer. I mean, but the mark of a successful outreach, as somebody said earlier, it's the quality of the feedback you get. And the mark of a successful outreach program is when you hear that a certain population or a certain group is not engaged, you make an effort to engage them, that you connect the dots, you respond to your weaknesses. But having said all of that, so I'll stick with what I've said. The number of events that have taken place, the variety of events that have taken place, the variety of events that are planned in the future, put you in the leading tier of cities that cared about community outreach. I will also say, and I'm glad you didn't ask me the question earlier, but maybe I'll answer it anyway. No matter what you do, you will not get a high percentage of the citizens actually engaging, and you will be criticized at the end of the process because a large percentage of the citizens didn't engage. I've done this for 30 years. Zoning is not an exciting topic to many people. They care about it. They think it's unfair. They don't understand it. They want it changed. And they don't meaningfully engage in the process, no matter what you do. And so I'm sorry to be a pessimist. All you can do is the most you can do. And I think it's not the number of events, it is the variety of channels and is the number of times during the process that you adjust to try to fill in the gaps that you're seeing. Well, we still aren't hearing from this group. We're still not hearing from this group. We're going to try something new. So that's my answer. So.
Yeah. And then if I could just add on to that, you know, Don brought up, really evaluating who you're hearing from and are you hearing from the right groups. And so we have been tracking what those demographics look like. And, with module 1, we heard a lot from homeowners. We heard a lot from older individuals. And so when we talked to you, you guys really felt that diversity was important, and we were already on that trail. And so our goal is to really capture some of those people that we haven't heard from. And so we will have some unique survey codes. We'll have some unique QR codes. So Chris had mentioned, hey, we didn't hear from the renters. We didn't hear from those individuals. And so we will track to see if we get those numbers up. We haven't heard from the younger populations where they have different needs and different preferences than our older generations once had. And so we'll be tracking some of those individuals as well. So in different locations, we'll have different codes where we can actually follow some of that to fill in those gaps where we feel like we have missed or we have a weaker link and we haven't heard from those individuals yet. But, on a broad scale, we've done a really good job of offering multiple ways. When you look at what others are doing for zoning code rewrite, typically they have a survey that goes out, which is a general survey, and then they will have maybe work sessions that occur with their councils or their commission, depending on what their structure looks like. So we've certainly gone above and beyond. It's really important for the mayor for us to go to people where they are, which is really leading us down this. We need to visit each one of those planning areas. We also need to hear from the community as a whole and really hear from those diverse community groups. So we have taken notes as we're moving along, and we're hoping to do better and better each time. And hopefully we'll be able to provide feedback. And then Brad had also mentioned, he hasn't heard of these other events. The information that I provided to you was either a publication, a radio, or an event. It's important to note that, we also as a city publish on our website, on our Facebook accounts, our Twitter accounts, those types of things. So we have the ability to reach audiences that way. And in multiple occasions, we've also inserted an insert into the utility billing. So people, when they get their monthly utility bill, if you take a look at it, there's a little note that, hey, the city is really busy for zoning code rewrites. So, and oftentimes it's a word of mouth as well. So if we can communicate with a group and they're willing to share some time with us, we're willing to go out. And so you'll see a lot of those on that list as well.
So I just wanted to follow up, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Andrea. I think that was a really good synopsis, and thank you, Dawn, for that as well. And to Roberta's point is, I don't think it's pessimistic either. I think it's realistic, and I think it's important that I said it at the last meeting, is that postponing the zoning rewrite for 6 months may be the right thing to do. But the idea that there is always going to be people that say that there should have been more. We just cannot get into this system or the process of people complaining and then doing an additional 6 months. And so maybe the first 6 months extension is the right thing. I don't agree that it is necessarily. I think it's the quality of the feedback that we're getting, but assuming that that the powers that be agree it needs the 6 months extension, which it seems like it has been assumed, then I just urge you to hold it fast to that accountability and be accountable to your time frame, because there will always be people complaining about it. So that's my little diatribe. And I think I have seen it in the sewer bills, Andrea, and the other place that would be a really broad group would be like young professional groups, Boise Young Professionals, there's architect groups, there's industry groups, as well as trying to approach the Boise School District, because those folks mostly live in city limits, to just bring a flyer home or a QR code home or send out to the PTA or whatever.
No, those are great recommendations. Thank you so much. All right, we do have 2 more in line to provide us some comments. Let's start with Richard, and then we'll move to Byron.
Hi, thanks. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. My internet's been wacky today, so I've kind of been on and off. But so yeah, outreach, I'm sure, is really tough. I know it's tough just from a perspective of a neighborhood. I do think it's really important, though, to focus not on the effort. Of course, the effort is, we have to make the effort, but on the results. And I'm really concerned about geographic representation across the city. Boise is traditionally, has very uneven voting turnout in terms of city elections, very uneven participation. And I would suggest that, direct mailings go out to a number of areas, and I would focus on what the comprehensive plan calls areas of change. As you know, many areas, especially on the outskirts of the city, but also a large area of the bench, are designated areas of change. That means your built property values divided by the land values is below some threshold, roughly speaking, and therefore, it's both used as prescriptive, as this area should change, because it's often quoted that way by planning staff during permit process applications, but also it's just simply descriptive. With both of those, whether it's prescriptive or descriptive, those are the areas that really need to understand what may happen. They also, I believe, are areas that tend not to participate much. Most of my neighborhood is considered an area of change. When the comprehensive plan was changed in 2011, we did a post-mortem on that. There was one response from our entire neighborhood on the change in the comprehensive plan. Now, much of that was because we were in the area of impact. But of course, you get annexed in then to a comprehensive plan that's created by a city. So I think it's very important that we ensure that we have geographic responses in a relatively equitable way. So thank you.
Thanks, Richard. And there was one major thing that I left out too. This is really kind of where we're asking you guys to help us as well, is we want all of you to come and attend each of your neighborhood planning area meetings. This is where you can be, a voice on top of ours, inviting your neighbors to attend some of these events as well. So that's one ask that we do have of each of you. If you're able to make your neighborhood planning area, that is a huge help and just another echoing voice that we might not be able to reach on our own. Byron, I see your hand raised.
Yeah, thank you, Lindsay. Just a really quick question for you and or Andrea. On the city council work session that's coming up, is there any benefit for any of our committee members to attend that? Or is this really just sort of like an internal presentation to city council with not really like a lot of workshopping?
I'll defer to Andrea. I do have one note because this too, the one that was on February 1, we just got changed this morning to 2/8. So make sure you make a note of that for the city council work session, but I'll defer to Andrea to kind of answer more so what she thinks.
Yeah, so this will not be like a general workshop that you might see. What it will be was we'll be updating them. We'll be providing them a lot of the same information that you've had, letting them know what that community engagement looks like. Reminding them of what we heard for module 1, and then kind of walking them through some of those big changes for module 2, and really being able to ask them their feedback and understanding what's important to them, understanding if they feel like we've missed something that might be in Blueprint Boise that we could be changing or assisting with or supporting with the zoning code rewrite. So it'll be that way. Now, the other thing is that our city council and all of our appointed officials too, we're going to invite them to a lot of these neighborhood conversations and community conversations so that they will be there also to talk to our community and to really explain the need for that, for these types of changes or looking at alternatives. So there is ways for us to talk to both the elected officials as well as the appointed officials.
Great, thank you so much.
And then we have hands raised by Jessica and then Brad.
Hello, a suggestion for Lindsay and Andrea in terms of outreach. I think it'd be really great if the city could reach out to the various diverse religious organizations that are in the community. I'm sure the mayor has a phone list, if you will, of various religious leaders, because there's we have a lot of new Americans, people, folks that English is not their first language. And at least at my church, there's a service where it's all Hispanic community, all speak Spanish. The service is in Spanish. And if someone made a presentation, or if it was something that was put in, I know a lot of churches have like a Sunday bulletin, if you will, even a mention in there. I think that would be one way to get new Americans, folks that maybe the church is their community and that's the only way they get some information. And also a way to reach some marginalized folks that they don't have access or know how to even do the QR code and social media and all the technology that a lot of us take for granted. Thank you.
Thanks, Jessica. Brad?
I'll be quick. I just wanted to say that I agree with Richard on these targeted areas. I personally, I don't live in the city limits, so these laws are really not going to affect me. But my area, I wouldn't consider it an area of change. It's probably an area of change. I feel the effects of what's gone on, and I take this really personal. I know I probably come off as some kind of hard ass, but this city is very important to me, and there's a lot of vulnerable areas that need protection. So again, I just, like Richard said, targeting some areas that are vulnerable, I think would be very appreciated. Thanks.
Thanks, Brad. And we definitely don't want to discredit people that are in areas of impact as well. So, again, these are not, if you don't live in the Central Bench neighborhood planning area, you can still attend if you'd like to. So that's just something I want to reiterate as well. And in our survey, we do ask what neighborhood you live in. If you don't live in it, that's okay. We say, I don't live in city limits, but I live in an area of impact. We'd still love your feedback on some of these because they affect everyone in our community, whether you're within city limits or not. So we appreciate that. Thanks, Brad. Anybody else have any questions? Otherwise, we'll kick it over to Deanna and she can go over the conversion map.
Thanks, Lindsay. All right, and can folks see my screen?
Yes.
Great. So I'm going to go quickly over the last of our package to prepare for module 2, which is the conversion map. And I think this has been said as we went through module 1, a lot of the community wanted to say, how does this affect me? And can I look and see a map and how this is going to touch my property? And so we've been working to translate the previous zoning code into our proposed conversion districts. And this will be linked directly on the city website, as well as a PDF that you can download and zoom into and print however you would want. But this is considered a story map. So you click on it, it will pop out into a new web page. And we have an explanation. Just of an introduction to what is this conversion map? What does this mean? The big thing is that in order to find your conversion district, we just took the zone that was most similar to your existing zone. So if you were, your property was C1 neighborhood commercial, the conversion zone is MXN, which is mixed use neighborhood. Those are the two most similar zones. If you were R1C, we still have an R1C, so you stay R1C, which is R1C single family urban, converts to R1C, which we've renamed urban residential. And so you'll scroll down. We have a couple directions here in how to interact with the map. So if you're like, what is this? How do I work on this? This kind of will give you some instructions, but you just keep on scrolling and you'll see two maps side by side. And with the notice to click anywhere to interact. So you can click and you'll see the two maps side by side. On the left, it's the proposed zoning code rewrite conversion district. So this is what you would be becoming if the code is adopted. And these are our current zoning codes. So what has already existed today. This just takes you to a standard zoom, and then you can click and drag and try to find a place you're interested in. And it's mirrored exactly in the other map. So you'll be seeing the same thing. You can tell you could zoom out, zoom in. Right now I'm hovering over the central bench area. You can also, if you want to know what these colors mean, they're different zone districts. We have below here is our legend, but what I would use typically is what makes this great as an interactive map is you could zoom in and find a parcel, zoom in, and you can actually click. And as long as you click on it, it will pop up a label. So this is the proposed code, light industrial district. And in this little table, it will show you right here, current zoning district. It's M1 light industrial district, and the proposed district in the conversion map will translate it to I1, which is our new name for that. And it's the light industrial district. So when you're reading through module 2 and it has specific rules or regulations about a certain district, you could come look at that map and say, oh, this would apply to this neighborhood. This would apply to that neighborhood. One thing I do want to show as well, you'll see that they say current overlay design district. So if you're already in an overlay district that has been carried forward, so if we move to some of our historic areas, or even we have a couple of overlay districts on Capitol, you can click here. And this is current zoning district is R1C, single family residential urban. It's going to convert to R1C urban residential. It currently has an overlay design district, which is our historic design overlay, and it's being carried over exactly the same, the historic design overlay. So you'll be able to click in and see all of that. And you can also, if you're interested in a specific address, I wish I knew City Hall's address off the top of my head. I could type that in.
150 North Capitol Boulevard.
Okay, there we go. I was like, I'm not going to put my house address in, but it will take you directly to your address you're interested in. So here's City Hall. It's in the MXD, which is mixed use downtown. That's the proposed code, and it's currently zoned C5 central business. So just a way to make the code a bit more real for you when you have the document in front of you and you're reading those dimensional standards for R1C urban residential, you could come and zoom out and say, well, what areas is this going to impact? And you'll be able to see all of those. And again, if you're just interested in seeing the city as a whole, you could come down here and it shows you the conversions. So you'll see how the colors relate. And I think I see, Richard, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you. So is this a function of what we already saw in module 1? Essentially, a conversion of the zoning districts, and those that we saw were being the new ones, and how they would be folded into. Is there any actual redrawing of any boundaries here, or is this just a functional conversion?
It is a functional
just
conversion.
Simply an algorithmic conversion from, yeah.
Yeah, we took what
great,
would be
thanks.
the most similar zone and just applied it straight across.
Yeah, and that is what we saw in module 1, right? As we saw the new proposed zones.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're the same conversions that you
Yeah,
saw
yeah,
when we
yeah.
presented module 1. Yeah.
Yeah, we just didn't have a map for
Okay.
them.
Okay, thanks.
Drew?
Yeah, similar to that, may go without saying, but does that mean there's a subsequent potential smoothing of some of the map? Because it looks like the existing patchwork is pretty much carried over. Maybe that's what Richard was asking.
Yeah, the existing patchwork is carried over, and that's
Gotcha.
been our plan throughout the process, was to make sure we have the right places and the right rules in the places, and that we would adopt the text and the map as a package. And we're doing just a straight conversion at this point.
Deanna, do you want to show them in the bottom right-hand corner of those maps? There's also a legend that's accessible there as well.
Oh yeah, great point. So you can click, so no, if you don't want to look at, oh goodness. If you don't want to look at the legend down below here, it's on the bottom right on either map. You can click and it will pop to a legend just right next to it. And so this legend is applying to the current zoning districts. And then this legend is applying to the proposed zoning code districts. So you could scroll through and see the colors right next to each other. And you can, if you want as well, if you don't, if you're on your phone, this map should be mobile friendly, but if you are on your phone and it's kind of too hard to see next to each other, you can pop it out into a new tab if you just want to look at the maps. So that's that.
Yeah.
This is Don. Good job. This will be very helpful to the citizens, and so thank you. It's a good job.
All right. So we have about 15 minutes left. We do have 13 attendees, so I want to give them some time to share any thoughts that they might have. I'm going to go ahead and start with Ed because I know he's had his hand up for such a long time. So Ed, why don't you kick us off? And then just after Ed, we'll hear from David Klinger.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, great. Good to see you again, Andrea, and others. Look, I guess I'll telescope this down a bit from the last discussion. I'll try to be brief. First, in my 45 plus years of social science research as a professor and working with young people, I know about a lot of methodologies and how hard it is, as Deanna was pointing out to us earlier, to get enough people to respond. I think that's really an important point. It's important to cut across all amographics, not just those of us that somebody called the old guys. So I think that's really vital. I live amidst all the young folks down by the university. There are other methodologies. Surveys have their problems and they're systemic. If the surveys start with, well, I want some outcomes for zoning, that'll skew just about any methodology you want to throw at it. This I know. There are methodologies like panel analysis that are very labor intensive. There are unobtrusive measures, which is a very popular book still in sociology, that try to get at the lived experiences of people. So I think there could be other ways of doing things besides surveys, but I understand there are tough timelines and COVID is part of that. Okay, enough on that outreach issue. Standardization is like a multi-edged sword. And I understand that standardization is great for efficiency and helps people who are making decisions and want to move on. However, standardization can override various areas of the city. Some areas of this city are already much more dense than other areas of the city. So I'm thinking in particular of this blanket 20% reduction in spaces. That could really be oppressive to some neighborhoods already. So I'd just like you to consider that. I think neighborhood associations will speak to that. We need a much better map of that sort of thing than simply what we're planning to do with this zone versus that zone right now. Scaling down a little bit more on that issue, I really liked the idea of trying to deal with maintenance in the city, and to hear some voice given to maybe some serious penalties, at least in some other cities, about that. Okay, so the trees are growing, they're not dying, and 5,000 cars are sitting in front of the parking lots under the trees where they're not supposed to be. So I want to push back a bit on the chat orgy of yay, parking reduction, because I think that's a developer's argument more than it is a resident's argument. So I would like you to include something in the zoning about parking. I'm not saying we have to do the old debate over and over again that every neighborhood goes through, but if there's not a piece in there about maintaining the frontal areas of lots in this city, then you can have an effort to create as many save the tree programs as possible and still have cars overrun it. I love the vision of no cars in certain areas. That would be great, but some of you know I live in the university neighborhoods, and dream on, people. That's not going to happen for about 20 years, if you're lucky. What we're going to see instead is more, not bicycles, but scooters parked in places where it makes it difficult to walk on narrow streets. One last general point, and then I'll stop. I would really like to see a kind of grid map, not really a grid, some sort of visual representation of what was left out or not addressed in Blueprint Boise and why that does not show up in the plan for the future. As much as Blueprint Boise has been invoked, I've already heard from my colleagues in the Southeast Neighborhood Association some question about whether or not Blueprint Boise is actually being followed. It's being addressed in some areas, but not all areas of Blueprint Boise. And so it'd be nice to have a discussion of that in the general meetings and at the neighborhood meetings. Anyway, thanks for your time.
All right, David.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, thank you. Just a couple of points to going back to your outreach and community involvement discussion. And some of my points were previously made so well by Roberta and others. And I'd like to echo some of the remarks by your consultant, Mr. Elliott. He mentioned that he had a career of 30 years in this kind of outreach and community engagement. I did it for 35 for the federal government. So Don, perhaps I rank you a bit, but I'd like to reinforce some of your points that you so ably made. I think in terms of your outreach, we instinctively think of the existing conduits to reach people, the neighborhood associations, interest groups, various avenues that have been tried on a lot of projects in this city. And yes, those are avenues that have to be a part of your outreach plan. But that's basically preaching to the engaged. And in a third year of pandemic, hosting meetings, expecting people to show up on cold winter nights in the middle of pandemic to engage on a dry subject like zoning code rewrite, you're only going to get the most engaged and the most committed. And I would like to caution you and remind you that the marginally engaged and the unengaged are your constituents too. And we can't lose sight of that. I think back to the proposed downtown library project that reached out to a lot of constituent groups, a lot of identified stakeholders, and spent many months engaging with them. And yet when it came time for this city to vote on a specific library project, nearly 70% of the voters in this city rejected the plan that was on the table. What does that tell us? It tells us that your audience is not just the people you hear from, not just the traditional conduits that you use to reach the public. You have to include the marginally engaged and the unengaged and the intentionally antagonistic. They are all your constituents. It's a matter of whether you want to engage in passive marketing or active marketing. And those are two entirely different approaches to selling a product. Just a few random thoughts that other people mentioned, that this is going to be a learning experience on community engagement. I would submit to you that this is no place for a learning experience. You have to do it right. This is too important. This is too broad. This is too pervasive to do it wrong, or to trip up, or to do it less effectively than you could. The level of engagement was characterized as better than a lot of other cities around the country have done it. Well, I would submit to you that in Boise, Idaho, exceptional performance should be standard, standard performance should be substandard, and substandard performance should not be tolerated. Boise is different. We need to approach it from that perspective rather than using other cities as our benchmark. We have a lot of existing conduits to reach a broad cross-section of the city. Voter lists, as previously mentioned, utility bill accounts, probably the easiest way to reach everybody in this city. And if it costs money, so be it. This city has money, believe me. This city has the money to do this right. Finally, I would like to ask you to think how we can engage city councilors in this process. I realize they're going to be the ones voting on this, and they have a very narrow set of blinders in terms of staking out positions on documents and policies that are not fully formed, but there is no prohibition on them engaging in how to do better community engagement in their districts. We elected city councilors this time by district. We will elect 6 councilors in a year and a half by districts. This zoning code rewrite is inherently a neighborhood-based, a community-based activity, a function, a project that right down to the ground level. These city councilors need to engage for the districts from which they were elected. My example is ward politicians in Chicago. They are responsible for a patch of ground, and they are the public's first line of point of contact with their municipal government. I think we need to be treating these districts seriously, and we need these elected officials to engage fully in the outreach that's being done within their districts. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you for the opportunity to inject a little perspective from my previous work in community engagement at the federal level. I commend you for what you're doing. I will be at your meetings.
Thank you, David. Now we have Dave Kangas, and then we'll follow up with Yul Kim.
Sorry, there we go. Can you hear me now?
You're good.
Okay. David Klinger kind of talked a lot about the library process and what happened there. And I would really hate to see this process be fully implemented and just to have a huge backlash. There are a lot of very controversial things that are going to drastically affect our older neighborhoods in this. And my overriding concern with this process is applying it inequitably. Newer subdivisions with CCNRs and HOAs aren't going to be nearly as affected. Many of your historic overlay districts aren't going to be affected. So it's really going to hit the older neighborhoods. The older neighborhoods, which right now are already providing what affordable housing we have and also have the lowest median income people residing there. Haven't commented before. I've been looking through the allowed use chart, but that didn't really trigger much until I could see what was going on with densities. Now that I see that, you're talking about just erasing density numbers, what's the point in having different residential classifications? You're running them all together. You're allowing pretty much anything on any residential lot, and now you're doing away with densities. So why not just say, hey, anybody do what you want? Because what I see here is going to be creating more confusion on what can be put on a lot than the way it is now. When you define densities with your zone, there's limitations. Here's the box. If you have an extreme circumstance, well, then you can mess with it. But when you throw out this broad open book, everybody's going to be scrambling and pushing for the maximum. And what's going to happen, and it's happening right now because of the zoning density bonus with R3 lots. The price of R3 small lots in the city has just skyrocketed. They're going for over $1 million. 0.7 acres on Vista sold for 1.5. So when you go into the older neighborhoods and you take a small single family home that is being rented at a affordable rent because you have an elderly landlord that's had the property forever, and you go to them and say, wow, we could put 6-8 units on this lot. Well, that's going to kick somebody out. That property is all of a sudden gone up in value 20-30%. And that property will set the stage for all future sales in that neighborhood. So when you implement this, you're not going to be triggering affordability. You're going to do an immediate bump in pricing, an immediate bump. And local developers don't have that kind of money to make these moves. That's why you're seeing so many of the bigger internet or national developers come in. They can afford to pay those prices. They're looking long term. They're looking to gobble the land because acquisition's more important than price. A local developer needs to make it pocket, make it pencil. So I see a huge cluster coming up, and I see a lot of irate people in single family homes in our older neighborhoods. And getting their attention is extremely difficult. And if you plop this down citywide, those first buildings, those first developments go up in the neighborhood, you're going to see an uproar. I don't know if there's a possible way of staged implementation, but if you implement it with the suggestions that you're going with now, there's a lot of problems. When you look at narrow homes with one car parking, I've got a prime example in my own neighborhood. 12 substandard lot skinny homes in a row that just created a major cluster for parking throughout the neighborhood. There's no place for other people to park, so they parked in front of other people's houses, blocking post mailboxes, driveways. The result of that is the substandard lot is if you don't have an alley low garage, you had to have two lots, or you'd have to take a lot and a half to build a house so you have a two-car garage, so you have two parking places. Boise, as nice as it is in Idaho. Transit doesn't exist. People rely on cars And that isn't going to change in my lifetime, and it's not going to change in the next 20 years. You can already see the state cracking down on local spending. So I see big problems coming up here, and it's not going to aid affordability in any way. It's going to cause a lot more problems, and it's going to drive homeless situation even worse as these older homes that are being rented at an affordable rate, as they're kicked out and they have nowhere to go. So that's it.
Thank you, Dave. And how about Yul Kim?
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you. Thank you for the forum. And first of all, let me just commend Lindsay and Deanna on your outreach efforts. I would encourage you to keep trying. I know it's hard. Me personally, I only heard about this meeting 2 days ago because my neighborhood association sent out an email about it, but please keep trying. I live in the Collister neighborhood that has the Sycamore agricultural overlay. And I'm very anxious. I can see Brad's nodding his head because he was at some of the community meetings that we had of concerned neighbors about what the rezoning might do to our neighborhood. And, you know, just some background, the neighborhood has primarily 3/4 acre lots, and most residents have animals. They have roosters, they have sheep, they have horses, they have beehives. And whereas I appreciate when Don Elliott says all residential neighborhoods have to participate, everyone should contribute. If the map shows a one-size-fits-all approach, where every neighborhood gets mapped to R1C, you know, a lot of us will be very disappointed. And, you know, as far as I know, I may be wrong, but looking at the city website, there are only 2 existing agricultural zoning overlays in the city, the Sycamore overlay and the Big Sky neighborhood overlay. And I understand that if you start making exceptions for particular neighborhoods with NIMBYism, that all of a sudden every neighborhood wants an exception. But again, there are only 2 existing agricultural overlays, and to maintain them is not going to have a significant impact on the city's ability to increase density. I would encourage the staff to come up with a metric, but I would guess the 2 neighborhoods combined are less than 1% of the area of the city. And on the other hand, if you do make the change, there's going to be a drain on city resources. There's going to be a huge increase in the cost of serving that neighborhood. Why? Because with the formulas that Don shared, I can put 6 more houses on my lot. And I don't care what the situation is when the person buys that house. There will be all kinds of calls to the police. There will be calls to every city service about, oh, my kid has a bee allergy and there's a beehive 2 lots away from me. Or I get waken up every morning at 4 a.m. by the rooster that crows on this side of me and on that side of me. It's going to be a problem. It's not a problem now. Why? Because the vast majority of the homes are near the street. All the animals are in the back of the lots. And so it's not a problem. But if you do a one-size-fits-all, and as Don said, no frontage requirements anymore, all these flag lots will appear. And I'm sorry, Don, but when you say that all residential neighborhoods will contribute and it will not radically change the neighborhood, that does not apply to this neighborhood. So I really hope that when I look at the map, which I suppose is now available, thank you, Deanna, that it shows that the Sycamore overlay is preserved and that the zoning is R1A still, not C. Thank you for the time.
Marissa, it looks like you have your hand up. Would you like to share something with the group as well?
I have heard, I'm in Southwest Boise, in the area of impact as well, with the Southwest Data County Neighborhood Association. And I have heard a lot of discussion kind of along the lines of what Dave Kangas said, that certain neighborhoods will be excluded from this subzone based on the fact that they're in a historical district or because of their current CCNRs. And we've even had some infill developments that have not gone forward in some of our more newer neighborhoods, I guess you could say, because of those CCNRs. And does the city have any knowledge about like what percentage of the city will not be affected by this because either within historical district protections or other protections, or because they do have those CCNRs in place? I'd just be curious to know. It's talked about that this will affect the whole city, but I don't think people believe that is true based on some of the comments that I'm hearing.
Sure, and just to take, I guess, a brief stab at that, some areas might have existing CCNRs. However, times are changing. There are needs for accessory dwelling units for multi-generational living, whether you have a college student or an aging parent. All of those things may change over time. There are often times where CCNRs are modified, where today it might not impact it, but in the long run that it may change and people might be looking for those types of things. As far as historic districts, the densities, the allowances for accessory dwelling units, the availability to convert an existing home into a duplex, a triplex, or a fourplex is there. So you very well may see those changes occurring in some of those historic districts. It's not like we haven't seen a large historic home be converted into multi-units. That has happened significantly over time and is really kind of what makes the North End unique. So the historic guidelines ultimately only preserve the exterior of the structure, but you can add an accessory structure. You can do internal improvements to modify that home to add additional units. Those are all possibilities. So I think it's fair to say that the entire city will be impacted. The impacts could be different, and especially over time, those impacts could evolve. But that's my initial thought. Brad, you had some comments.
I know we're running a little late today, but I just wanted to say that I appreciate the outside comments. Ed, David, Dave, and Yule. Many of these points I've been screaming since the beginning of this, and sometimes I feel like I'm just being brushed off. The fact is that these comments are what I'm hearing outside of this group, and this knee-jerk reaction to stuff houses in anywhere you can get them to provide this quotes affordable housing. We're not looking at the impact from in the future. We're running out of resources. We're overrunning the hospitals. We're taxing the fire departments. All of this. And something that was said last meeting that stuck with me the whole time was we get a lot of complaints, but we don't get a lot of solutions. And that really hit me. I have to admit, this is so difficult. I don't have solutions. But I think we need to, I know we want to get this thing over with, but we need to really pay attention to what the long-term effects of what we are doing here. I know this is a small thing that's zoning, but we're in the dirt here. This is serious. This is going to be a long-term effect of our city. I love this city. The reason I get so worked up about it, I grew up here, and I get very emotional about it. So it's very important. I think we really need to pay attention to what we're doing here. Long-term effects. Thanks.
Well, I want to thank everybody for their participation today. We had a number of attendees that visited with us today. I think we had a really good conversation. And I want to thank everybody for their recommendations and their thoughtful considerations. That, this really builds upon the process. And I've heard time and time again from people from all perspectives saying this is really important and it's important that we get it right. And we agree. So we are very happy that you were here to join us. We will be back in about 3 weeks. So our next Citywide Advisory Committee meeting will be held on February 17th. And we're hoping that you'll have had an opportunity to take a look at Module 2 and might be able to provide us some feedback. So thank you once again, and I hope everybody has a great evening.
Thanks, everyone.